There is a project called Horseshoe Solar. It is taking place near Avon, New York, and most of the 1,400 acres proposed for this project is taking place on Seneca territories, Aboriginal territories. And what this means, there's been long-term occupation of Onondaga peoples and Onondaga associated peoples. So that includes Chanusios, Neutral people, Seneca people, Tuscarora, Meskwakis, Delawares. There's even been a Onondaga village in the area. So off the top of my head, I just mentioned there's been 10 nations that have been living in this area since time immemorial.
So basically what we're dealing with is Invenergy Corporation wants to build a mega solar farm next to and on top of the former Canawaugus Territory of the Seneca Nation. This area has thousands of years of history. There's untold number of burials of ancestors in the area, and archaeologists have long known that this is an area of great significance. We're saying that clean energy is good, but it needs to be mindful of where it's located. And a place where there's that much history and where there's that many human remains should not be a place where a large-scale solar project takes place.
So Pan American Consultants, LLC, is a regional cultural resource management company. A CRM company is one of those companies that get hired by a development agency that wants to do some construction or development. And what they do by state law or federal law is they come in, they do a historical review of the property and surrounding area, and then they start going through with an archaeological survey to see if there might be any cultural resources or anything of significance in the area where the projects are being planned. So in this case, Pan American is actually in charge of doing the historical and cultural resource surveys for Invenergy. And in their initial report, they clearly state that the Treaty of 1826 is in question because everyone knows the history around this treaty, and it's no secret that it was never ratified by the United States.
This was a major area. Everyone knew where this was in the 17th century, 18th century. When the Senecas sold their lands in 1797 at the Treaty of Big Tree, a corrupt and alcohol-soaked debauchery, Canawaugus was one of the reservations set aside. Seneca negotiators gave up lands that they couldn't control because of an onslaught of Anglo-American settlers pouring into the region after the American Revolution. So what the Senecas did was keep certain strategically and culturally significant pieces of land: Canawaugus, Allegheny, Cattaraugus, Tonawanda, Little Beard's Town, the towns up and down the Genesee Valley. All that was significant and culturally valuable. They hung on to it for as long as they could, and they lived here. These weren't just dumping grounds. They were towns, fully functioning towns where people lived lives full and rich with meaning. They met their needs spiritually and culturally and physically, and they would have stayed there had not the Senate approved a treaty under terms that just, there's no question about this, just violate the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution requires that 2/3 vote of the Senate is needed to ratify a treaty. The 1826 transaction that took Canawaugus and the other Genesee Valley reservations, it was a tie vote, 20-20. It's a black mark in American history.
In this case, I guess getting back to, we're at a point where no matter where people dig a shovel full of dirt in New York State or in this area, let's say, they're always going to be on our homeland. Personally, my DNA comes alive when I get over these hill over there and I realize my DNA kicks in and I actually feel like I'm home.
Invenergy, which is the name of the company behind Horseshoe Solar, started the process, the Article 10 process, in Caledonia, which is in Livingston County, in October of 2018. Their plan was to stay on the western side of the Genesee River, bore under the Genesee River, and attach to this substation.
So last fall, 2019, we received a notice of intent from the state of New York through a process called Article 10. Article 10 is a process created by the state of New York where clean energy companies are able to kind of bypass some of the regulations that have been put in place to environmental protections. And so this process takes it out of many hands that normally are involved in a process that determines if a project should proceed or not within the state of New York. And in this case, Article 10 has been set up where a judge presides over the case and listens to all the evidence before they allow the company to move forward and implement this clean energy type of projects.
The archaeological of this area is very, very important, especially to the Seneca people, because this is one of their reservations, was one of their reservations, because of corn planter and also Handsome Lake being born on this land. And so we're looking, so we did an awful lot of research, paper research so far about it, and we're finding out that we're very concerned about them putting already roughly 4-acre solar farm on this land, and apparently they haven't done any sort of shovel test, even though this was a extremely, extremely sensitive area.
But the main point of this project is right in the heart of Canawaugus. And that's really the main area that we need them to stay away from, because we all know through our traditions that people have lived here since time immemorial, and that means over time people have been buried in this region. And so over time this has become a sacred place.
Our ancestors are buried on these lands. Here, on these very lands. Pretty powerful stuff. And here we are again, back on a portion of our ancestral homelands. Let me remind you of how we are meant to be. As people, we are taught about responsibility to be the caretakers of the Mother Earth, caretakers of the environment that surrounds us, the Mother Earth, the waters, the plant life, the elements without a voice. This land is able to sustain the needs of the people, planting, irrigation, hunting, burials. Gonondagan was the largest Seneca village that's close to here, and it was able to sustain 10,000 natives at its heyday at once. The largest trading hub of the Haudenosaunee, without electric, without gas, without money. Think about that.
I think it should be known first and foremost that our communities are not opposed to solar, but we are opposed to solar of this size, this magnitude. Here. Our communities are and will lead the way when it comes to alternative energy.
So when we come to a place like this and we try to resist a mega development like this Horseshoe Solar Farm, it is to remind people that we are still connected here. Not just Onondaga, all of us Ongwe are connected here because we are born here, we are buried here. It is a part of how we identify ourselves. So as we introduce each other, as we talk to each other, remember, as Native people, we get called Indians and Native Americans and First Nations and all that other stuff. We're Ongwe. We're real human beings. And we're real based on our past and based on our present and based on our future. When we talk about 7 generations, This isn't about the 7th generation. It's about the commitment we make to each generation between now and the ones that we will never know, the ones that we will never see. That's what 7 generations is about. It's about acknowledging that we have a responsibility to our relatives, not just our children and our grandchildren, but 7 generations down the road. This development that they're talking about doing here, it won't even last that long, but the impact of it will. So that's why we have to stand up to it.
If you live in Rochester, one of the sites you know is Mount Hope Cemetery. You wouldn't want to put a solar plant. None of us would want a solar plant in Mount Hope Cemetery. None of us would want a solar plant on Temple Hill, right? These are sacred sites. These are historically significant places. At Mount Hope in Rochester, Frederick Douglass, Susan B. Anthony, these enormously important people in history are buried. At Canawaugus, this site, generations of people lived their lives and are buried. And it's not just a burial site. It's not just camps like the people hired by Invenergy describe it. This was a town. It was a place where people lived lives full of meaning, just like non-natives live lives of full meaning. It was a rural New York town that existed up until 1826 when it was stolen in a treaty that in black and white violates the laws of the United States and the United States Constitution.
We look at our ancestors differently than what Europeans basically do. We look at ours as helpers, that they come into our sweat lodges or they come into our dreams or our visions. And that's important to us. And every time that this gets dug up, and every time that they get put into boxes and put into museums, what happens to their spirit? Okay? What happens to us? You know, we need that foundation for ourselves. And I'm hoping someday, maybe, like I said, everybody can come together and say enough is enough. You know, Black life matters. Well, so does Native. Native life matters. And Native past life has mattered because that's where we're standing.
It's important to understand that the Seneca Nation is not opposed to solar development. We put in a solar farm here in the Steenburg community on the Allegheny Territory in 2017. It's a 1.9 megawatt system. Provides a lot of clean energy to households in the community. The Seneca Nation also installed a commercial wind turbine at the Canawaugus Territory. So myself, Paul Winnie, and many other Senecas have been using photovoltaic solar on our homes for power for years. I've been using solar for 18 years on my home. I built the system that powers my house. We understand the importance of clean energy and moving away from fossil fuel sources. But the important point we're trying to get Invenergy and the public at large to understand is that this place is too sacred. There are too many burials there, too much history there for it to just be over 1,000 acres completely dedicated to solar panels.
Well, I could speak to the idea that we have ancestors there, but it's also, you know, we removed some of our grave sites during the Kinzu area, and you know, pretty much non-native cemeteries or burial areas are not disturbed. During the Kinzu area, we had to move countless family cemeteries as well as community cemeteries from our ancestors' final resting place. So it strikes a nerve deep with every Seneca. While the nation supports green initiatives, solar energy, wind-driven initiatives, we surely do not support any kind of development within our sacred cultural areas, which this Horseshoe Project ultimately does. With the finding of the human bone there, that's surely an indicator that there's more. If that's on the surface, there's more there. So we oppose it. Or at this point, we would rather they move their project elsewhere. And if that means a project on territory, I think we would welcome that in a non-cultural area.
I believe that the developers and the state, they actually need to start a conversation with the Seneca Nation, the Tonawanda, Seneca Cayuga, the Tuscarora, and the other inhabitants who continue on but maybe no longer live in the area. There has to be a discussion, because as I sit in these meetings with the state, they're not realizing how deep our connection is to this territory. It runs deep. It runs so deep that I don't even know where to begin sometimes explaining to them that they can't do this. Or maybe they should reconsider doing this, because they're not only going to possibly destroy the earth, but they're affecting our ancestors who are now resting below the surface of that ground that they want to use.